Jamel Morris Demons, is known to fans as YNW Melly. The 24-year-old artist only made it big a few years ago, but his entire career has been fraught with legal troubles, often arising as a result of alleged gang activity. After an arrest in early 2019, he became more than just another troubled rapper with a reputation for making bad decisions. He was pulled up on first-degree murder charges after the deaths of two men close to him. His trial got underway in June 2023, and the court has gone on to reveal a number of shocking details about the rapper. The first week of trial, YNW Melly's trial is still ongoing. He may have been arrested back in 2019, but it took a little over 4 years for his case to really come together. A lot went down during that time period, and I will go over it in a bit. However, in the interest of making it easier to follow along with the events of the trial, I'm going to break this down week-wise. This way, there will be a clear point of reference for the revelations in court and what they might do for YNW Melly's defense, especially with the death penalty on the table. Alright, before I get into the trial, here's a quick rundown of the crimes Melly has been accused of committing. In late October 2018, Melly was hanging out with his friends YNW Bortland, YNW Sack Chaser, and YNW Juvie outside a recording studio. But something horrible went down over the course of the night, and in the early hours of October 26th, Bortland pulled up to Memorial Hospital Miramar, with Sack Chaser and Juvie bleeding, and Melly nowhere to be seen. Both men had allegedly been shot in a drive-by, but it was too late for them by the time they reached the hospital. A hospital representative said they arrived with multiple gunshot wounds. They were dead already. Melly went on to mourn the death of his friends online, and for a while, it really felt like the young rapper had lost two of his friends to gang-related violence. But the story changed in February 2019. Law enforcement showed that forensic evidence had led to some shocking revelations. A police statement said further investigation, supported by forensic evidence, concluded that Demons shot and killed Williams and Thomas Jr., and that Demons and Henry staged the crime scene to resemble a drive-by shooting. Bortland was arrested in Texas and sent over to Florida, while Melly turned himself in after the allegations came to light. But the rapper continuously professed his innocence, taking to his Instagram to say, "A couple months ago I lost my two brothers by violence, and now the system want to find justice. Unfortunately, a lot of rumors and lies are being said, but no worries, God is with me and my brother," his brother here referring to Bortland. Alright, so that's the basic rundown. The trial got underway on June 12th with YNW Melly's lawyer coming out swinging with a really strong opening statement. The defense focused on the fact that the prosecution was lacking any concrete evidence tying Melly to the crime.
And if after 4 years of investigation, the state comes and says, hey, he killed two of his friends, his best friends, and you're wondering why, and their answer is, I don't know. That's the first indication that they're just guessing and don't know what they're talking. And that, ladies and gentlemen, by itself is reasonable doubt.
The first day of the trial wasn't anything earth-shattering, except for one claim. The prosecution was mainly focused on providing context about the situation for the jury, while giving a brief roundup of the evidence they had in place to prove Melly was guilty. They referred to surveillance video that proved all four men were in Bortland's car when Bortland claimed the drive-by shooting allegedly happened. Beyond that, they had phone data, blood splatter analyses, and a bullet casing that should prove that Sack Chaser and Juvie were shot dead from inside the car. However, the prosecution has not been able to find the murder weapon, so they have no way of tying that casing to Melly, at least for now. But the one claim they made was that Melly told his friend Fredo Bang, real name Frederick Givens, to pick him up just minutes after Bortland had reached the hospital with the bodies. The prosecution went on to explain that what you're also going to find out is that while Mr. Demons, Melly, is out there on the side of the road at 4 in the morning, 4:42 specifically, he sends a drop pin, a digital homing beacon to his current location, to one of his friends, Frederick Givens. Frederick Givens is also involved in the music industry, and he, Melly, asked to be picked up. Frederick Givens then, about 11 minutes later, is sent another drop pin where Mr. Demons has moved a couple of meters. Nothing much of note happened over the next few days, but the final day of the first week, June 16th, was truly explosive and may have even led to the revelation of some vital information regarding Melly's whereabouts when Bortland drove the victims to the hospital. Felicia Holmes, the mother of Melly's ex-girlfriend, took the stand, and her testimony was a powder keg set ablaze and could have led to the judge declaring a mistrial. According to court records from 2018 that included a statement from Holmes, she had stated Melly called his ex-girlfriend on FaceTime the night of the shooting and told her two of his friends had been killed in a drive-by. Not only that, but Holmes's statement also included the fact that it looked like Melly was hiding and waiting for someone to come pick him up. Now, the second bit of her statement could potentially be very important because it supports what the prosecution initially claimed. Melly called Fredo to pick him up. Just remember that if Melly was actually waiting for someone to come pick him up, it almost definitely was not going to be Bortland, who would not have been able to leave the hospital so soon after pulling pulling up with 2 dead bodies, so it had to be someone else. One of the prosecutors wanted Holmes to testify about her statement from 4 years ago, but the witness did not prove to be all that helpful. Not only was her testimony repeatedly interrupted by the lawyers, but she was also declared a hostile witness by the prosecution. Things got even more complicated when Holmes declared she didn't remember her earlier statement, saying, "That was 4 years ago. I've had so much trauma in my life since then." That wasn't all, though. As she went on to deny, she sent an Instagram message to Melly's team suggesting she would snitch because Melly did not take care of her financially after promising to do so. The icing on the cake was when Holmes claimed that she felt intimidated by the prosecution.
Do you have any written threats from me?
It's intimidating. You've intimidated me this whole time. And now.
After this, Holmes would take a moment to criticize the state. Back in 2022, Holmes had been arrested for failing to make it to multiple court appearances, but she stated she never received a subpoena requiring her attendance. She went on to say, "The state basically has me on a monitor. I have to go to my job like this. People think I'm a criminal. The state has ruined my life." Melly's lawyer filed a motion for a mistrial after this, stating that the jury had been tainted by Holmes's testimony. The motion was taken into consideration, but the decision would have to hold off until the next week of the trial. Regardless, the very fact that a mistrial is even on the table could change how this case is approached. The director of the University of Miami School of Law's Innocence Clinic said, "If the judge denies the motion for mistrial, but things like this keep happening, the defense argument is going to be essentially, here we go again. The jury was tainted back in June, and now they're tainted again. There's no way that we can have a fair trial." This means that if Melly is convicted and chooses to appeal, the Florida Supreme Court will look at all the transcripts for the trial, including the motion for a mistrial. If a judge on that panel believes a mistrial should have been granted, then the entire case will come back to square one. The second week of trial. On the 20th of June, Broward Circuit Judge Joseph Murphy denied the motion for a mistrial, and the case continued, even if he did criticize the state's prosecution approach the previous week. The next day, on the 21st of June, an expert witness on mobile phone data took the stand, with the Assistant District Attorney Christine Bradley trying to use this as evidence to prove Sack Chaser and Juvie were not the victims of a drive-by shooting. While the defense attempted to argue that there was no guarantee Melly even had the phone with him, surveillance footage of the 4 men leaving the recording studio clearly showed the rapper fiddling with a cell phone. This means that he definitely had his phone with him when they all got into a car. In addition to that, the prosecution presented additional proof by showcasing a number of text messages sent to Melly's mother, Jamie Demons King, which included a reference to Melly's ex-girlfriend and Felicia Holmes' daughter. This clearly showed she was talking to her son. The subject of their conversation was definitely suspicious as well. In their conversation at the end of August 2018, Demons King and Melly spoke about the issues the rapper was having with Sack Chaser. The prosecution would read out the messages in court. King would refer to Sack Chaser as Melly's best friend before he would ask for a gun, a Glock 40 or 19. This definitely did not bode well for the rapper in court, as a weapons expert had earlier testified on June 14th, 40 caliber weapon had been used to kill Juvie and Sack Chaser. A.J. Bradley then went on to state that after they left the studio, tracking data showed all 4 men were at 3 locations: Miramar, Pembroke Road, and Pines Boulevard. When he was questioned, Bortland had stated the drive-by shooting went down at Miramar Parkway, but detectives were unable to find any evidence in the area. They did, however, find something in Pembroke Road. ADA Bradley contends that this was where Bortland and Melly staged the drive-by. Things got a little more complicated for Melly after this, when the prosecution stated that the phone data showed he had been with the victims just 15 minutes before Bortland pulled up with them at the hospital in a Jeep Compass. Over the course of the entire case, the defense had leaned on the fact that it made no sense for Melly to kill 2 people he essentially grew up with, especially without any real motive. In the first week, Melly's lawyer even pointed out how ridiculous it was when he said, "Do you know what does require motive? A young man to wake up one day and decide that he's going to kill 2 of his best friends that he grew up with, best friends that he hangs out with, best friends who he lives with, best friends whose careers he was trying to launch alongside his own. They have no reason for why he would do this because there is no reason. And if there's no reason, it doesn't make sense." On June 22nd, the prosecution aimed to dispute that statement when they brought in a masked detective named Danny Polo to link the deaths to gang-related activity. Polo needed to keep his face covered in the light of death threats he had received in unrelated cases. Despite the defense claiming that Melly was being denied the right to face his accuser, Polo was allowed to take the stand. The detective claimed that Melly was a member of G-Shine, an offshoot of the Bloods, and that the murders of Juvie and Sack Chaser had something to do with this affiliation. Polo also went on to state that there were hundreds of photos of Melly alongside other Bloods, showing just how deep in he was with the gang. Despite Despite this testimony, though, the prosecution has failed to come up with a clear motive at this point. It must be noted that the prosecution is not required to establish a motive, but doing so is arguably essential in painting a complete picture of what went down. DNA testing added another wrinkle to the entire case, when it was proven that while Melly's DNA was not found on any other key pieces of evidence inside the car, his prints were found on the door handle next to the passenger's seat on the right. This would certainly be strange, as the video footage of Melly getting into the car saw him sit behind the driver on the left. On the face of it, this doesn't look like much, but if the prosecution can prove, without a doubt, that the shooting occurred from the back of the car, they would be able to tie Melly to the murders. But there was an issue with all of this. Melly's DNA was found when a second test was conducted. That's right, Melly's DNA was not found on the door handle during the first test. To make matters worse, items were sent in for testing years after the crime, which the defense jumped on to further support their claim that the investigation had not been conducted properly in the first place. They had even managed to get a crime scene investigator to admit that she might not have changed gloves while handling different bits of evidence, which may have led to a small risk of cross-contamination. To top it all off, the prosecution had not informed the defense about this test and its results, which upset the judge, who believed the state was playing dirty and had committed a discovery violation.
And I think that's a discovery violation. I'm finding it to be a discovery violation. I think the only way it can be cured is he's not going to testify about this second procedure that happened. That's not coming in. That's new discovery. You know, the defense doesn't have an opportunity to depose the witness. The defense doesn't have an opportunity to do X, Y, and Z. And that's just not the way it should be. It shouldn't be done by surprise.
The third week of trial. Anyway, let's get back to Detective Polo. The next day of the case, which was also the first day of the third week of the trial, was entirely focused on his testimony. June 26th saw the prosecution attempt to solidify Melly's gang ties in the hopes of building on the narrative that this is all gang related. The next day concluded Polo's time on the stand. Up next was a doctor who had been tasked with determining the cause and manner of the deaths of Juvie and Sack Chaser. The doctor's testimony included hundreds of pictures of the victims, which were used to complete the autopsy report and determine the manners of their deaths. In the end, the doctor claimed that Sack Chaser had been shot before and after he was killed.
In this case, you could, on both the individual you did the autopsy of and the individual that your fellow medical examiner did, correct?
I can tell you the first shot. I don't know the order of the second and third.
Okay. And the first shot on both of them were the fatal shots.
Because they are already deceased when the other ones are inflicted.
Okay.
This was a really interesting finding because it supported what the prosecution had been saying all along, that Sack Chaser and Juvie were killed before the drive-by was staged to cover things up. Unfortunately, the doctor could not determine the distance from which they were shot, so the prosecution was still fighting to prove that they were shot from inside the vehicle. They were given an opportunity to do just that when the associate medical examiner took the stand. She stated that the autopsy of YNW Juvie proved that he had been shot at close range, anywhere between 3 inches and 3 feet. She also went on to state that one of the bullet wounds in the left cheek moved from left to right and front to back. This lines up perfectly with how all 4 men were placed in the car. Bortland was behind the wheel, with Melly behind him on the left, and Sack Chaser and Juvie on the right. If Melly or Bortland indeed did the shooting, then the wounds would be on the left. The medical examiner also stated that the bullet that entered Juvie's left cheek was fatal, with a number of other wounds caused after his death, just like Sack Chaser. In an interesting admission, the medical examiner also said that the victim's clothes are required to determine the manner of death, but Juvie was brought to her without any clothing. This was the testimony that closed the 9th day of the trial, with the pieces slowly beginning to come together. The next day would prove to be pivotal for the prosecution. Day 10 of the trial opened with Sergeant Christopher Williams taking the stand. Williams is a shooting reconstruction expert, and he examined the Jeep Compass in which Sack Chaser and Juvie were murdered, and his findings were nothing short of shocking. Williams stated without a doubt that both men had been killed by one man with one gun, but that was not all. Williams went on to drop another bombshell when he said, "My determination was that this was not a drive-by shooting." In his investigation, he also determined that the rounds in the Jeep had been fired from a stationary position and stated that someone inside the vehicle did the shooting. I am not going to get into the details of the murders out of respect for the victims. Williams went on to say that both men had been shot at close range, with Juvie showing signs of having been taken by surprise. Ever since Bortland and Melly were arrested, there has always been a degree of doubt over who did the shooting. Law enforcement has always claimed that Melly was the one who killed both men, but Bortland was also in the the car, and he was also in the driver's seat on the left. Could he have shot Sack Chaser or Juvie? According to Williams, no, he could not have done that. He stated that the driver's back was firmly pressed against the seat when Juvie and Sack Chaser were shot, and when asked if Bortland could have fired the shots, he said he would have to have an arm like Inspector Gadget. He concluded by saying that it would have been impossible for Bortland to shoot Juvie, who was in the back seat. The 11th day of the trial saw the prosecution continue to question Williams, before Juvie's mother, Leandra Phillips, took the stand to identify her son in the video footage featuring all 4 men. The rest of the day was spent entering photos and videos into evidence in what was a relatively low-key day, considering everything that had happened over the course of the week. The court is not expected to reconvene till July 10th because of the 4th of July weekend, at which point the jury will be in store for a site visit. They will visit the forensic garage containing the Jeep Compass in which Sack Chaser and Juvie were killed. This will probably only happen once security measures have been implemented, with the jury only expected to observe the vehicle, Melly's odd behavior, and what we know. Any discussion about this trial would be incomplete without discussing how YNW Melly has conducted himself over the last few weeks. People first noticed the rapper's odd behavior on the 3rd day of the trial when he was seen sitting with his hands folded and eyes closed in prayer, mumbling to himself before opening his eyes and blowing kisses to the seated gallery. Among the people to notice this was Juvie's mother, Leandra Phillips, and she did not take kindly to it. She took the opportunity to speak with NBC Miami and said, "He did it a couple times. That wasn't his first time. I walked out because I don't, what you praying for? You sitting there like you ain't got no remorse. Like every time I walk in, you smiling. This ain't the time for that. This is sad. This case is serious." In addition to all of this, Melly has also been repeatedly seen laughing and joking around with his lawyer. In a strange incident, video footage also showcased the rapper making eye contact with someone in the seated gallery and repeating the same words over and over while getting extremely agitated. As expected, people had a variety of reactions to all of this on the internet. While most people were of the belief that he did not care about the fact that he is facing the death penalty, others contend that because Melly has been in prison since early 2019, this stuff is not exactly new for him. Regardless, this behavior becomes even stranger because the rapper was seen wiping away tears on the first day of the trial when footage of his friends played in court. Whatever the reality may be, Melly must also be aware of the fact that the testimonies from the medical examiners and Sergeant Williams support what law enforcement had initially reported. Melly had shot both men. Having the death penalty on the table is stressful enough, but that decision does not even have to be unanimous for him to be convicted. That's right, Governor Ron DeSantis' non-unanimous death sentence ruling means that only 8 of the 12 jurors need to recommend the death penalty for the sentence to be carried out. If convicted, YNW Melly would be one of the first people to go down as a result of this law. The jurors' site visit will undoubtedly play a massive role in helping them form their decisions about what really happened. So let's take a second and just go through what shocking details have come up in court so far. Melly was not in the car with Bortland when he drove to the hospital with Sack Chaser and Juvie, but phone data has shown that all 4 men were together about 15 minutes before that. That is not all though, because the prosecution has alleged that Melly hit up Fredo Bang to come pick him up. Felicia Holmes' testimony may have given Melly an ace in the hole because it allowed his lawyers to file for a mistrial. Even if he ends up being found guilty, should he appeal, there is a possibility that the Florida Supreme Court could end up granting the mistrial, giving the rapper another shot at proving his innocence. We also know that Melly had some conflict with Sack Chaser a couple of months before he was killed, and the rapper's conversation with his mother showed him ask for a .40 caliber gun, the exact kind used to kill both victims. The prosecution initially struggled to establish a motive, grasping at straws by bringing in Detective Danny Polo and trying to make this a gang-related killing. But as I had mentioned earlier, the prosecution does not need to establish a motive, and the testimonies of both medical examiners and Sergeant Williams paint a picture that perfectly aligns with what forensic evidence had initially revealed all the way back in February 2019. But for all those testimonies, the fact remains that Florida law enforcement has failed to find the murder weapon, which prevents the prosecution from building a truly ironclad argument. These are all things that have been established in the courtroom over the last few weeks, but there are things that happened outside the courtroom leading up to the trial that might shed some light on a few things. There are 2 major events I want to take a minute to talk about. The first focuses on what YNW Bortland has been up to over the last few years, and the second is all about a wrongful death suit that might just give the prosecution the motive they have been looking for all this time. So back in April 2020, Melly ended up getting COVID-19 and requested to be placed on house arrest. The judge denied his request, but then granted Bortland the same request the next month. This was definitely odd because Bortland was facing 2 counts of accessory after the fact in addition to first-degree murder charges. In a statement shared by Bortland's lawyer, he stated that while his client has been granted house arrest, Melly will remain in prison, which was exactly what ended up happening. Bortland has been more or less a free man, while his co-defendant has been behind behind bars. Reports in January 2023 also alleged that Bortland spoke to law enforcement, stating that he was just the driver. Bortland will go on trial in October this year, which gives the prosecution plenty of time to strengthen its case against Melly, which might also help Bortland in his defense. Testimonies have already proven that there was only one man with one gun who shot both Sack Chaser and Juvie, and who knows what else will come out before October. This entire scenario also creates a very interesting dynamic between Melly and Bortland. What if Melly's defense pivots to placing more of the blame on Bortland? Or what if Bortland cuts a deal that throws Melly under the bus? If these men can go to the extent of staging a drive-by shooting to cover up their crimes, then all bets are off when it comes to fighting for their freedom. There is also a very real possibility that Melly may have grown resentful of Bortland over the years because his time in prison has been anything but comfortable. The rapper has spoken about the difficult conditions he has had to face behind bars, including having his phone privileges taken away from him over minor infractions. But that is not all, as Melly has also spoken about how he is genuinely feared for his life. In an Instagram post that spoke about the numerous difficulties he has been facing, the rapper also wrote, "I have been threatened by deputies, lieutenants, and sergeants that say they will hide me from the world and threaten to beat my ass every day. And if I tell my lawyers, they will lie and say I hit them first." Words from Sergeant Anthony Kidd and Lieutenant Jean Baptiste. "I have literally been hidden from the world, so I have no other choice but to believe the next step is them beating one half to death like they do to other inmates almost daily here at the main ale in Broward County." On the surface, at least, it looks like Melly should have every reason to be upset at how much easier the last few years have been for Bortland, so it will be interesting to see how things play out between them over the course of their trials. The second thing I want to talk about is the wrongful death suit filed by Sack Chaser and Juvie's families against Bortland and Melly back in October 2020. The lawsuit went on to state that the four men had a large sum of money coming in, but could not agree on how it would be distributed. A dispute over money is one of the oldest motives there is, and one of the lawyers filing the suit wrote as much. When there are less people splitting up the prospective money, the people on the receiving end will get more. This claim was supported by Juvie's father as well. He revealed that the disagreement stemmed from their plans to sell the YNW brand for marketing and licensing purposes. He said that Melly and Sack Chaser were expected to receive $200,000 each, while Juvie would have gotten $100,000 from the $500,000 deal. Juvie's father had absolutely no doubt about the fact that Melly was responsible for his son's death.
From the day one, I believe that Melly was responsible for my son's death on October 26th when I first heard the story, because his explanation when I finally talked to him in Cortland on a FaceTime, their response and how they was reacting, they showed no remorse. They didn't act like they was grieving, like they lost a best friend or nothing. They was, in my opinion, they was in the best spirits. They never came to town, never came to my son's funeral.
If these claims are actually true and a deal was on the table, then it completely changes the dynamic between the four men. They weren't just people who had been friends for ages. They were business partners facing a major disagreement about their brand with a large sum of money involved. But the thing is, at least for now, this secondary suit has had nothing to do with the trial that is going on right now. As things stand, the prosecution is still piecing together the hour or so between the four men leaving the recording studio and Bortland showing up at the hospital in October 2018. But in the process of doing so in court, expert testimonies and other evidence have shown that Melly is potentially a cold-blooded killer who murdered two of his closest friends over a financial dispute. A few months after Sack Chaser and Juvie died, a documentary focused on Melly dove into the relationship he shared with both men. Not only had he referred to Juvie as his day one, he also said, "We got the same brain. Me and all my had the same dream growing up." But somewhere along the line, did Melly decide his dream was more important than theirs? And if he did, was it enough for him to kill them? The rest of the trial will most probably reveal more shocking details about YNW Melly. But as of right now, who knows how things are going to go down?